Late to life diagnoses of ADHD have been on the rise for women in perimenopause. So whether you are one of these women, whether you're wondering if you have it, whether you've been touched by it in one way or another, you're not going to want to miss this episode as we talk in this interview about how it shows up, including some of the positives and what you can do to support your unique brain in perimenopause so that you thrive. Let's get to it. What's up, sisters? Welcome to the Period Whisperer podcast. I'm Bria. I'm your host. If you're new, I'm so happy you are here. I'm your perimenopause and menopause sister, your holistic trainer, hormone specialist, translator of your female body. I'm a recovering people pleaser and hustle addict turned body whisperer and hormone decoder. And I am here to help you de-stress your body, decode what it is saying, become the CEO of it, and own your own health, energy, and weight loss again. This show is for you, the overwhelmed, overworked, underappreciated step woman who dreams of a body they feel strong, energetic, and sane in. The woman who knows that she shouldn't just wave the white aging flag and believes in a body and life of peace, love, and purpose. But you don't just know how to get there yet. So if you are stuck in your body, your energy, your life, you are in the right spot. Let's lean in and learn what our bodies are saying to us. Hey, sister. Welcome to this episode of the Period Whisperer podcast. And let me tell you, it's an interesting one. More and more in my practice, I've been connecting with women who have had recent diagnosis of ADHD much later in life. And this can be really overwhelming, especially during the time when we're already super overwhelmed. So whether you have wondered if you have ADHD, have been diagnosed with ADHD, have a child or someone you know in your life with ADHD, you're not going to want to miss this episode. My friend, an amazing human, Christine MacCarroll, who is a functional nutritionist, board certified in holistic nutrition, and a certified brain health professor, joins me for an amazing conversation to talk about her late diagnosis with ADHD, as well as supporting her daughter who has ADHD. We know that sadly, most doctors have little to no training on true healing. So she rebelled and has helped hundreds of women recover mood, energy, and mojo, and clearing up brain fog and ADHD symptoms along the way. In this interview, we talk about how ADHD diagnoses have been on the rise for women in perimenopause, how it shows up, including some of the positives, and what you can do to support your unique brain in perimenopause so that you thrive. I'm so excited that you're here. Let's dive in. Well, welcome, Christine. I'm so excited about this conversation. I have to say, I'm really excited to dig into all of it for several reasons. Firstly, because in the last 5 years, I've noticed a significant rise in women coming to me for help with their perimenopause symptoms who've had a late ADHD diagnosis. And secondly, because my wife has ADHD, so I'm really invested in learning more about it. So I'm super grateful to have you here. Welcome to the Period Whisperer podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Bria. I'm excited to talk to. I was like, as soon as you said those things before we started, you hit record, you said your wife. I was like, oh, so many things.
Yeah.
I'm interested in talking to you about. Yeah.
Help me out here. Yeah. Help me support, right? We always want to understand and support. And so why don't we start a little bit with your story specifically, like around your late diagnosis with ADHD, and maybe even before that, what even ADHD is for anyone who maybe isn't as familiar.
Yeah. So that's a great starting point. So I think ADHD historically has been categorized as something that happens to young boys. And, we'll get into this later, but this often is why women don't get a diagnosis until later, because the stereotype, like I bet if you just said, what's ADHD? And you or just asking like random person on the street, like that, interview style where you go up and you're like, what's ADHD? They're gonna be like hyper little boys, right? Like that is just the stereotype, like the little kid who can't sit still in class, like jumping off the walls. But there's multiple kinds, right? So there's a more hyperactive kind, which typically is more boys. I mean, there's variations, right? There's inattentive, which is typically more girls, which is more daydreamy. And then there is a combined type, which is both hyperactive and maybe inattentive as well. Yeah. Okay. So, and then like the difference, like the ADD versus ADHD, that is truly semantics. It was a difference in the diagnostic criteria a few years ago, or actually the DSM manual. So like how psychiatrists diagnose. Yeah. they changed it so that ADD is no longer the official term. It's ADHD. It's the same thing. Like there's no difference in symptoms. It's just the name.
Thank you for clearing that up because I had no idea. Like I had no idea. So that's really helpful information to know.
And most people don't, or they'd be like, "Oh, well, isn't that ADD or is that different?" Like it's literally just the name. So it looks in a lot of women like, so that inattentive is trouble with focus, but the I would say that almost hyperactivity is happening inside of her brain, and you don't necessarily see it outside, right? So someone might, and this is why one reason why it doesn't get diagnosed early is because maybe a little girl just looks like she's daydreaming. So no one's paying attention to the little girl who's daydreaming. They're paying attention to the little boy who's causing a ruckus.
Right.
And
the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Totally. Yeah. And so a lot of times it takes a longer time for a girl to get a diagnosis. And it may not happen until later in life. For me, I think I didn't get a diagnosis until later because I'm 45, I'm almost 46. The time when I was growing up, like the diagnosis did not exist for girls. Like that stereotype is there for a reason. And they literally were like, it's boys and boys outgrow it. This was the other thought. They hit puberty and something magical happens and then it's just outgrown. But really what happened is they maybe just learned how to sit still.
Interesting.
Or maybe they joined a sports team. Right?
Yeah.
So many girls and women were not diagnosed. So women in midlife, this diagnosis didn't exist for us. And then the other thing is all of these hormone fluctuations, which I know we'll talk about, that start happening in perimenopause, exacerbate the symptoms. So where you might have been able to kind of manage, and the kind of way I think about it is like you were simmering for a while, all of a sudden perimenopause hits and now we're at a full boil. Right. So that's the secondary reason I think that happens. And so for me, combination of diagnosis didn't exist and wow, when I hit perimenopause and those hormones changed, it really brought that to the surface. I didn't even realize it was like a possibility for me. And so then, when that happened, I also realized that my 13-year-old daughter, who was going through the fluctuations of adolescence, her simmer had hit a boil as well.
Interesting. So how did that for you and your story specifically, like, what was happening that drove you to even go to the doctor? And did you have any idea that ADHD was like in the spectrum for you?
So the funny thing was, I remember really clearly sitting in a doctor's office for a friend. I wasn't even there. Like it was literally, I had taken her to the doctor's office like 10 years ago, probably. And I read this magazine article and there were some symptoms in there. And I have no idea why I picked it up other than I was bored and I picked up this random magazine. Yeah. And the symptoms sounded like they might be the same as me. And it was like, you might have ADHD if, right? And it was like the one that sticks out to me, which is funny, was just like, you can't read for a long time without feeling really tired.
Interesting.
I have a master's degree. The amount of like reading required and the exhaustion I felt to get through the same material as other people, I always felt like I was like, why is this so hard for me? Right. So that was kind of the first inkling, but then I put it off. I was like, no, I couldn't possibly, like, that couldn't be true for me. Just put it right out of my mind. And it was actually interesting. So I started running genomics assessments on my own clients. And I was trying out a few different companies. So I'd worked with a few companies historically, was trying out a new company and they had a whole section, they have one because I still use it, around likelihood of ADHD. And I got my genomics report back. And it's crazy. I was just sitting in a hotel room by myself. I got the report and it came up as elevated risk for ADHD. And it was like the lightning bolt from the sky. I'm like, it just felt, it was just like the ding, like just, it is true. I was like, okay, obviously I need to go through the motions of getting a diagnosis, but it was like, it was true to my bones. And I was like, I knew immediately. So then, of course, the other ADHD flip side is hyperfocus, which is like you get super interested in something and then you're like a pit bull.
Yeah, down the rabbit hole.
I was deep dive, and I was by myself in this hotel room for a week. And so I was just like, all the way down the rabbit hole all day, every day.
Yes.
And I actually only pursue diagnosis because I knew we were going to need to do it for my 13-year-old. And I didn't want her to feel alone. I wanted her to
Right.
be like, yeah, I got someone on my team who knows what this feels like. It's not just like a label. That's really the only reason I went down that path, because as soon as I did all my deep dive research, I was like, zero chance that this is not true.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I just, for pure curiosity, what was the time difference between when you saw the article and kind of dismissed it and you got that report back from your testing and the lightning bolt hit? How long was that?
It was 10 to 12 years.
10 to 12
And
years.
yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that happens to a lot of women with a late diagnosis that for sure happened to me is a period of grief. Like
Mhm.
just mourning how much harder my life was during that time without diagnosis and
Understanding.
support. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very real thing. And, I think like on a little bit less of a scientific and more of like just a personal opinion level, I hear this as this feeling from a lot of women when they finally understand and learn so much more about their cycle and their hormones. They're like, it's, mourning, it's angering that we didn't have this information when we should have had this information. Why am I 40 something figuring this out or finally hearing it? And even then you're stumbling upon it. It's not like it's being
Hmm.
presented to you as a thing. So I can
Yeah.
understand that period of mourning for you.
Hmm. Yeah.
I have like 100 questions, but I want to try to keep this thing that must have been very powerful for you, and powerful for, once you're able to move through the morning to be able to support your daughter. What, like, is there something different? Like, first of all, is it a genetic thing if your daughter has it? Can it be a nurtured thing? Is it a nature thing? Like, is something when they test for it, is there like a gene? Like, can you break that down for us in order to actually know where it comes from, why it's here?
Hmm. So I'd say this is one of those $1 million questions. And there actually is, there's not like 100% agreement in, I would say, like the professional expert sphere. I would say we do know that there is a strong genetic component. And even before there was genetic testing, you could see it in families. And it was for sure one of those things that for me, um, right down the rabbit hole. Besides my own genetic report, I was like interested in that genetic piece because I immediately knew it was my daughter. But then of course I'm like XYZ family member and also this family member probably. And
Mhm.
what was most fascinating is once I started talking about it publicly, I wasn't even actually talking about it with my family. I was talking about it in public, and extended family members were reaching out to me and either confiding a diagnosis or saying, I've always thought.
Oh my God.
So there for sure, we've known for a long time there is a family component.
Right.
The genetics piece, I think, is pretty damn clear to me. And I do genomics testing, like I said,
Yeah.
and there are specific markers. It isn't part of diagnostic criteria, though. So if you were to just go to get a diagnosis, they're not going to be looking at your genetics.
Mm.
They're looking at your symptom profile, which, to be fair, I mean that the whole field of like epigenetics, genomics is that intersection of nature and nurture, right?
Mhm.
So you can have a predisposition, it can express more based on different life circumstances, nutritional circumstances,
Yeah.
lifestyle factors, right? So those genetics can be expressing at a higher or lower level, and somebody might actually have genetics for it and say, I don't really feel like I'm symptomatic. Likewise, someone can feel highly symptomatic and maybe not have as high of a
Right.
predisposition, but
There's
maybe
a
so
spectrum.
many other factors have come into play for them. So I don't diagnose. That's obviously not part of my
Right.
my scope of practice.
Right. As a functional. Yeah.
Um, yeah, but from what I have seen, I think it's a very, very clear genetic piece.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the lifestyle piece of how much it's expressing can really
Mm.
shift things.
So, do you believe then that we can like manage, support, improve symptoms holistically through
Yes,
functional? Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. I
Yep.
love that because that's what I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. But do you know, statistically speaking, like what percentage of females have ADHD?
So once we started actually addressing that it could be it could be females as
Yeah.
well, it really looks to be about equal. So the like statistical norms are about 1 in 10, and that does hold true for boys and girls. Yeah. And so, and it's really, again, the diagnostic criteria not existing earlier, why it looked like it was less.
Mhm.
But really in more recent years, I would say the past probably 5 to 10 years, that they've measured more accurately, it's
Yeah.
equal.
And in this, I'm just so curious about I assume there's a rise then of late diagnosis. Like that's what I've been seeing just in my practice, let alone what I think, you're saying here. Is the greatest number of women, getting a late diagnosis in these like over 35, 40 perimenopause, menopause years?
Yeah, so a huge majority of women, like if you look at a bell curve, and there was actually a recent survey, and so this is survey data, right? But a recent survey from Attitude magazine, and it was like the bell curve was like, I mean, like almost like a mountain curve. Like it didn't
Mhm.
just look like a tiny hill of the diagnosis happening around midlife. And
Wow.
I truly believe it is that like kind of that perfect storm of
Yeah.
didn't exist when we were kids.
Yeah.
A lot of us also, as moms, mothers may be having a child who's diagnosed and then go, "Oh crap, that
Mhm.
actually like has been true for me." So kind of opposite of me. Like I got it and I was like that kid
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
But a lot of women will, maybe they are looking through a survey or questionnaire for their
Mhm.
child, and they're like mentally checking off their own boxes, like, "Oh, that's me too."
Yeah.
And of course, those, perturbations of hormones at midlife, right,
Yeah.
are making things feel even more heightened. So I think there's that, like, perfect storm that
Yeah,
happens.
I couldn't agree. I love that the way you said that with the perfect storm because there's a multiple and I think like we know obviously the hormonal shifts are impacting the brain and I like to like look at it from a metaphor as like we've spent since we were 12, 13 like being subconsciously driven to reproduce and we hit this time and now it's less important or it's like that subconscious as the hormones change, it's like we have a bit more bandwidth to look at other things other than, constantly every month being back thinking about reproducing. And I think we get
Mhm.
way more aware and curious, like, whoa, what is this? I'm aware of it. And what does it even mean? So
Yeah.
it's like, to hear you had that lightning bolt, it's like you were finally ready to recognize it, deal with it, process it.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
So
It's funny
cool.
when I asked my daughter, like I was worried about the conversation, like before, because I had a pre-conversation with her pediatrician, like, "Hey, I want to bring this up at her next visit." And so I wanted to have the conversation with my daughter before we went in to
Mhm.
kind of like, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking. And I want you to do this little questionnaire before we talk." And she had never heard of it. And I figured A, she would have heard of it from like
Yeah. All
maybe
her friends.
boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And B, she might have some sort of preconception, or maybe she would have like teachers would have like had maybe negative things to say.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. I mean, she does go to a small school, but she never heard of it. And I was like, this is what a wonderful opportunity actually for me to frame this in a positive light, or like, here's
Yeah.
what we can do to support you. And here's like how we're going to help your body. And she didn't come in with any preconception, which
Oh, that's
was
amazing.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
amazing. So I know you mentioned, some of the things that how it showed up, even just that kind of recognition of like getting tired when you read, maybe sort of the daydreaming, but how does it are there more ways like for us to recognize it maybe showing up in ourselves? I know you mentioned an article and maybe you refer to that, but if you can outline some of those, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So, really, I think focus is the biggest piece, and to be even more specific, it's initiating tasks, completing tasks.
Huh.
So the I don't, it's not exactly a pre-diagnosis, but kind of like the looser description is executive function. So
Okay.
executive function is things like planning and organization and um, longer term thinking versus
Mhm.
shorter term, and a lot of that stuff that's in the prefrontal cortex, like that front part of your brain. So, for example, one of the biggest challenges with my kiddo was getting out the door in the morning, because time blindness is another thing, like being able to like know the amount of time, right? And so like my husband has joked for years. He tells me 10 minutes earlier than we really have to leave so that I'll be ready.
Mhm.
Same thing with my kid. Like the biggest challenge we had every morning was just her getting out the door on time. And once I realized actually, and I think this is one of the biggest, it's the relief and the grief for lots of women realizing they have ADHD, is we stop feeling so much moral judgment against
Mhm.
ourselves for like not doing it right. I do think there's also this feminine ideal of like the organized together woman, like women often organize the home or the like children's activities or the social calendar, and all of those things are extra hard for a woman with ADHD. So you kind of constantly feel like you're not just failing at life, but like failing at being the ideal woman.
Mm.
And so for me to take the pressure off myself, but also my kid, like, hey, like I don't, we're just gonna like go with the way that your brain works, and how can we structure the morning in a way that's going to make us get to school on time, right? Like
Yeah.
just structuring things differently in a way that works for her brain,
Mhm.
Um, so yeah.
No, I love that. And before we kind of dive into some of those ways, what are some of the positives, like what are some of the, the benefits or the strengths that maybe someone who has ADHD, because to me, I start thinking I'm like 10% of the population, like it's not a condition, it's just a different, an alternative way that our brain, that some people's brain works. And the same way some people just learn differently. And obviously knowledge is power, but what would you say are some of the benefits of having it?
hmm Which I love that question. I think it's so easy to like just totally ignore the things that like work well.
Yeah.
That hyper focus is one, which, it
Mhm.
can bite you in the butt if it's 2 a.m. and you've like hyper focused and you can't stop. but but hyper focus is amazing. So
Yeah.
if you had a project of whatever sort, and you were really into it,
Yeah.
like you're going to go 1,000 feet deep. And
Wow.
so like that, like super ability to be super, super driven on one
Mm.
particular thing can yield fantastic results.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly I think the more creative thinking as well. So there's like an ability to like put together dots, which I actually had always thought of as just like my own unique personal ability. And then once I realized and like started talking to other women with ADHD and meeting other people, I was like, oh, this is an ADHD thing. Like putting together ideas that don't seem like they're connected, but I can see the constellation and it's really clear to me how those things are connected. It's just
Mm.
different, like you said, it's a different way of thinking, but it can lead to some really like more interesting conclusions or like
Yeah.
in my work, I'm like looking
Good
at,
thinking.
yeah, like just like, oh, here's a way no one's ever thought about your health before. No one's ever thought about your constellation of symptoms before. And I can see
That
that
term,
relationship.
constellation of symptoms. Thank you. I feel like I've been hearing it more and more in the functional health space. And it's like, it just is such a beautiful image in my mind when you say that. So that's awesome. That's really great to hear. So, being able to look at things, being able to just see things from a different perspective and make them make sense where they wouldn't in a
Right.
traditional brain, we'll call it.
Yeah. A little, it's maybe less linear. So like there's
Right.
absolutely a place for linear thinking.
Yeah.
But you can get a lot of interesting insights from kind of yeah, that constellation approach and not necessarily so linear.
That's amazing. It's okay. Sorry, is there anything else before I move on and ask you another question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think those are a couple of big ones, and I do think I don't know that there's like stats on this, but I do think a lot of people with ADHD do tend to be more creative, maybe
Mhm.
because of that less linear thinking. So,
Right. They see
just
different
the
things.
the creatives of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. So there's so many positives to it. It's not but I can understand though, just going back to your point around that morning piece, like I can understand getting a late diagnosis like this, how frustrating that would be because it's almost like you're like, what could I have accomplished? How could I have felt in my confidence in my body in my life had I known this and had I been in a position to foster it instead of feel like I'm being a square peg shoved into a round hole?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, I love this. So let's maybe shift into like, okay, if we know this about ourselves, well, actually, first, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, interesting, some of these things are feeling right for me, what do you recommend they do?
So there are some good online questionnaires, and I would absolutely start. I mean, be looking for the ones that are specific for women and girls,
Okay.
and they do exist. So actually, I was talking about Attitude magazine. So there is one on there, and I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but it's pretty easy to search. So one of the pioneers of identifying ADHD. In women is someone named Sari Solden, and I actually had her on podcast last year. She's fantastic. And so she wrote a whole book, and I think it was the first book on ADHD in women. And she has some excellent questionnaires, and they're on that website.
Okay.
And so I think that's a great place to start, is just like self-identifying, if I check off all of these boxes. One thing absolutely to mention here as well is that even though there is this huge intersection with women understanding it may be a diagnosis in midlife, there are, of course, as you are well aware and have probably educated your audience on, there are brain changes that happen just from the estrogen progesterone fluctuations in midlife. Yeah. So I do think it's important to say, like, to ask the question of yourself, is this something that has been true for me my entire life? Or is this a new onset, right? So if it's a new onset, like for me, like I said, it was a simmer that came to a boil, but that simmer had been there for my whole life. And I could think back even to early childhood and my classroom experience and where that had been true, versus someone who's like, wow, I actually feel like I've always had my stuff together. And then all of a sudden, like, I don't. Maybe there's something else going on that's not related to having ADHD. So I just want to like pull that apart and clarify that. It does like, it's not just the diagnostic criteria. I think if we just look at biology and the way that, like, with genetics, you're processing dopamine, that would have been true your entire life. It doesn't just midlife pop up out of nowhere.
Interesting. Okay. So you're saying, like, explore, get to know yourself, ask the questions, get the functional support that you need, because it might not be that just because you can relate, which is so indicative of all things perimenopause, right? We can go in, to a healthcare practitioner, say we have these symptoms, get given something, even though really it's perimenopause.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. That's great. So, okay. So that's awesome. I'm going to look for that questionnaire and try to pop that in the show notes, but let's kind of maybe shift into what we can do if we do have this, if we do, for anyone listening, or maybe you have a child who has this. I saw one of your posts that intrigued me. You said about 30% of people with ADHD either don't respond to stimulants or can't tolerate the side effects. Can we talk about that for a minute before we get into other ways to support?
Yeah. So kind of like standard of care is a stimulant medication. And it's interesting that it has that kind of reverse action. So someone who you would think, oh, you're hyper. Why would we give you a stimulant and you're more hyper? Yeah. But it has a reverse action. So a stimulant is calming to someone who has ADHD. And so it gets you more into a focus zone versus kind of bouncing off the walls. So some people just don't want to, right? So you want a more holistic, natural way of doing things. Some people have really terrible side effects, like they can't sleep, or they have dry mouth, or they have heart palpitations, or it creates high blood pressure. So there's lots of reasons why someone might not want to just do medication. And even if you do choose medication, we're at risk of nutrient depletions that a lot of people don't know of from those medications. And then that can exacerbate other symptoms long-term. Yeah. So, even if you're looking at medication, there's still foundational supports. And if you don't want it, then absolutely, there's a lot of foundational support you can do. And as someone who really works with women, and I've worked with women's hormones for years as well, like that was where I came from before I, did my hyperdrive into ADHD. A lot of the things that we do to balance hormones holistically, of course, also apply to balancing our brains and neurotransmitters. So I listened to your episode on sleep. When I was driving yesterday, I told you I had a little trip. Yeah. I had a long drive between our location and the airport. And I was like, I'm going to listen to some of these episodes. And I was nodding in the car with the sleep piece. It's huge for brain function, obviously. So, getting sufficient sleep, keeping your blood sugar stable, getting your thyroid checked. There's a strong relationship between thyroid hormone and brain function. For women with ADHD, I think all women need to be looking at your omega ratios, your 3-to-6 ratio, but that becomes even more heightened with any mental health issues. But for sure, ADHD, you want to be looking at your omega ratios. And you actually can look at neurotransmitters as well. And then there can be specific supports around specific neurotransmitters, specific amino acids, specific nutrients. There are a lot of things, once we cover that foundational level, there are a lot of kind of additional supports that can help your brain just feel better. And I, besides all my client work, I'm an N=1 experiment. My kid's an N=1 experiment. all those family members I was telling you about, like I am trying all of the different things that are out
Yeah.
there to kind of see like what actually works and
You.
what
Yeah.
actually feels different. And so yeah, there's herbs that work much, kind of like stimulants, even different ratios of like EPA to DHA in a fish oil can stimulate your brain differently. Yeah. So there's just, there's a lot of support, but I always say you got to start with the foundations.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's like kindergarten. It's just the first place we need to start, right? It's like we need to make sure, if you want to get the most out of your health, but also any medication that might help you, I think we need to make sure that we have like the foundation for which the house is built upon. And that is
Totally.
where we come down to those fundamental pieces before we drill down more deeply. It's like, am I sleeping? Am I doing what I need in order to sleep? Am I moving? Am I eating well? Am I managing my relationship to stress? So
Mhm.
if we can start there, then it allows us to kind of go deeper the same way our kids start in kindergarten and evolve into through middle school and high school and post-secondary. It's like we need to not try to run the marathon before we do the 5K,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I get that.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. So what you're saying, even actually, I wanted to go back and then I'll recircle back to this piece. But what are some of the tests that you recommend as a functional practitioner then, or that you would do, to resurface the omega-3 6 ratio, or
Mhm.
some of the other things you suggested?
So I do think like a comprehensive blood panel is a great place to start for almost like if your blood sugar is out of whack,
Yeah.
that's your brain's energy, right? And
Yeah.
so, one of those stats that I love and I think it's so valuable is like your brain is 2% of your body weight and we use 20% of your calories to support brain function.
Wow.
That's how much of an energy hog it is.
Wow.
So
Love
blood
that.
sugar dysregulation is a big problem, both high and low blood sugar. Your brain can become insulin resistant as well. And then we're not
Mm.
getting, the fuel that we need. Um, Thyroid function, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
has a major role to play. There are nutrients we can look at. So there is a strong relationship with zinc and ADHD. We can change people's need for medication just from getting sufficient on zinc.
Mm.
Iron is a big player. It has to do with dopamine regulation. So some of those foundational pieces, actually, on a comprehensive blood panel, I think are great place to start and actually easy because maybe you can have a conversation with a primary care physician and they
Yeah.
might be willing to do some of those pieces.
Support some.
Um, so omegas, there's a test called the Omega Quant, and you can look at your omega-3 to 6 ratio, which I believe is even easily available as a direct to consumer test. So that's a really important one to start with as well. And then of course, gut function, right? So we know that there's that gut brain axis. We know that a lot of the relationship is the communication is going from the gut to the brain. There are some specific markers and changes in people who have ADHD. So I think the like next level that I would go to is for sure gut health and gut assessment for like looking at those neurotransmitters. There's urinary organic acids. You can look at specific neurotransmitters. Basically, how are you clearing things like dopamine? So that
Mhm.
was another thing I like. As soon as I kind of saw that piece for myself, and I was like, let me go back and look at all of my history of things I've done for myself. And I went back because I had never even like it was like something I had looked at on myself, like a brand of urinary organic acids, like, I don't know, 8 years ago. And then I
Yeah.
was like, I wonder and sure enough, like, clearing dopamine really fast, which means like it just doesn't stay around in my body. I don't have the benefit of dopamine as a neurotransmitter for very long,
Oh my
right? Which is like
gosh.
biochemistry wise, that's one of the biggest problems for people with ADHD is the dopamine is just not hanging around. So I was like, well, there's that. Like that's been showing up forever. But I wasn't doing anything to support it because it hadn't occurred to me that I needed to, right?
Mhm.
And then for sure, those hormone changes, estrogen potentiates dopamine. So we like women already usually feel better that first half of the cycle, but women with
Yeah.
ADHD, that goes times like 10. And
Mm.
then, there's changes with progesterone as well. So when progesterone falls off in perimenopause, it can even make us feel more anxious, more
Mm.
kind of spacey. Um, so there, like the like normal brain stuff that happens with cycles, it's like extra when you have
Yeah.
ADHD because of that interaction with estrogen and progesterone and dopamine. So it's down the line, but where I would say do something like a Dutch or a salivary hormone panel to kind of see where your hormones are at, because you got to fix the foundations first. But
Yeah.
for sure, you could say, hey, I'm having these big swings, and that may be impacting how my brain is experiencing dopamine. And
Mhm.
therefore, what are my symptoms like?
Wow. That it's so fascinating. Obviously we know that, women's health has been highly under researched. So it's amazing to start hearing and having these conversations more. But it's almost like even within understanding our cycle more, there's going to be legs of, women whose brains operate this way and women's whose brains operate this way. And that's not even to say there's others that we're not even clear on yet. And yet to know this, to understand that if we can understand our cycle and then understand what our brain type is, how much more sense I think everything could make to customize it for ourselves.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
cool. So, obviously we know everyone's bio individual and, we need to start with the foundations. But for you, what are those foundations? And like for you, when you started for yourself and or for your daughter, for anyone who's listening who maybe already knows or really wonders, but is like, what can I do now? What specifically would you suggest?
So she hates doing the random functional things, but I made her. we have to like actually just see what's happening in your body.
Yeah.
Like we gotta see how your gut is, and like,
Yeah.
let's look at the
Please
organic
poop
acids.
in
She's
this.
like, exactly. Please poop in this box.
She must hate that. Yeah. I'm
She's
sure
like,
my daughter
oh.
would die.
Well, when they were little, I actually did do this very young. She has a whole backstory of other, like brain stuff. It's how I got into this field in the first place.
Huh.
So she's done the poop in the box before, and I would collect it for her, right? And so that was even more embarrassing. Now at least she's
Mhm.
like, okay, just stay away. I'm going to hand you the little vial.
Yeah.
But we started. I mean, actually, a lot of the things that we had already been doing, I just put like the extra bumpers in that bowling lane, right? Like there is no exception around sleep at all. There is
Mm.
no exception around screens late at night, because that's going
Mm.
to keep you awake. There is also this genetic association where people with ADHD tend to have more dysregulated sleep patterns. They
Mm.
tend to have dysregulation of this. It's actually called the clock gene, where like how your circadian rhythm functions is different. And so lots of people have that disruption who have ADHD, which means they don't even get tired until later. It's really hard to go to bed early. So we had to put lots and lots of hygiene and support around her sleep.
Mhm.
I've always been very like protein focused, but if you just
Mm.
think about building blocks, right? So protein breaks down into amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks for neurotransmitters.
Mhm.
So if you're low on protein, you're going to be low on neurotransmitters,
Mm.
period. So I really make sure she has like a strong protein breakfast before she goes to school. There's never a bowl of cereal and out the door, like ever, period.
Mhm.
Like you have to eat enough protein before you leave the house.
Yeah.
And then I changed some of her core supplements. So I was mentioning like EPA tends to be a more stimulatory fish
Mm.
oil. So we moved both of us to a high EPA fish oil relative to DHA, which is interesting because usually DHA gets that like the pub around brain health,
Yeah.
but EPA can be more effective with ADHD. And then she does a couple of specific amino acids. I'm going to say what they are, but really like I don't want someone to like take this and be like, I'm going to just run down the street and get these amino acids and
Yeah.
everything going to be great.
Test, don't guess.
Exactly.
We're going for here.
um, but the precursor to dopamine is tyrosine. So tyrosine as an amino acid can be useful, and then theanine is can be actually calming. So they kind of work nicely together, especially in someone who might feel anxious with their ADHD, which is very very common with women. And the thinking around that really is that women are anxious because they don't think they're measuring up, right? They don't think they're functioning well. So they get anxious. So anxiousness may be secondary to ADHD. But those are two amino acids that she has first thing when she wakes up in the morning. And I call them her pocket vitamins. She sticks them in her pocket and like midday, that's her like, kind of midday support. But yeah, lots of protein, keeping her, her blood sugar stable throughout the day. Specific things we did for her gut and higher EPA fish oil were kind of some of those primary supports. And then, like I said, lifestyle, 100%. She's like protected around sleep, and so am I. Like I'm like
Yeah.
ridiculous about my sleep.
Yeah.
And then movement. So like I make sure she takes a walk every day. And obviously I make sure I would take a walk every day.
Yeah.
But, getting that movement piece in, getting blood flow to your brain, oxygen, there is actual literature around increased function after exercise for about 3 to 4 hours. So, those pieces are important as well.
And dopamine, I guess, right? What's so interesting. So it's, what I understand you saying is, someone who has ADHD, often it's like you metabolize dopamine faster, like your burn on it is quicker. So is it, would certain enzymes slow that, or is it they just provide more? Like, is the mechanism always going to burn that fast and we just need more of it to balance out? Or can we slow the metabolizing of it? The burn.
Yeah. So I don't,
maybe that's the word.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's not like clear data on things where we can just slow dopamine processing down. Like that does seem to be one of those genetic drivers that's just like, we're gonna process it somewhat faster. Okay. A couple of the things I would say, there are particular nutrients that help with that metabolism. One of the things that's really helpful and important is B6, but really, just kind of the B complex is important. I mentioned those specific amino acids, zinc, tyrosine. Those are all like pieces that have a role to play and are important. Something else I would actually say is, I think not just people with ADHD, I think as a society, we are very dopamine driven. And it can just be that, again, like that much worse if you have ADHD, because if you're already feeling low dopamine and something spikes dopamine for you, you're kind of going to want to keep doing that, maybe more than you should, right? And so when you do that, we actually can create a challenge where the receptors are not as receptive, and that can happen for anybody. But again, if we're already working with like a lower dopamine response, with a lower dopamine capacity because we're burning through it faster, we don't want to be burning out those receptors. And you can literally see physical changes in receptors when we're in like high dopamine activities all the time. So like, things that we like to do that are available to us, like binging Netflix or scrolling social media, or high sugar, high alcohol. Porn, right? Like all of these things that are just available to us that like really, really trigger dopamine, we actually can start to become desensitized. Like literally physically, those receptors are desensitized. Someone with ADHD may be even more driven to those activities because we don't feel dopamine very easily. So it's like, it takes so much more. So you're like, oh, hey, I just figured out eating chocolate cake spikes my dopamine. I'm going to eat all the chocolate cake all the time. There is an increased risk of binge eating disorders with ADHD as well, probably for that reason, right?
Drug addiction, would that be as well? Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, like up to 40% higher risk of alcohol use disorder. So these are the bummer downsides, right? But again, like why I'm like super aware as a parent, I'm like, I am like putting all of these boundaries in place. I escaped without some of these things. But when you just know that, to me, knowledge is power, right? Hey, I'm more likely to be triggered into a dopamine seeking activity. I'm more likely to get hijacked into staying with that. And then it's going to be even harder for me to feel dopamine's mechanisms later if I've burned out those receptors. So I'm just like weirdly clear again about those boundaries, right? Like, it's like I have a reverse alarm clock. I'm like, it's this time, everybody's screens are off. It's this time, no more social media. Like, because I know how easily it is, how easy it is to get sucked into those kind of dopamine driven activities.
For anyone, let alone someone who, as you say, who, whose brain thinks differently. So this has been, I could obviously talk to you for days, I think, about this. It's so fascinating to hear this, and also just such a beautiful reminder around our brain health, right? Like to really prioritize that health in body and brain, and that, because that can make a huge difference. If the things you're choosing are actually almost robbing you of joy, right? They're almost making it, then it becomes very hard to find the joy in your life, right? And we wonder sometimes why some people are so happy just existing. And it's likely because they have that piece supported, and that piece, which is available to all of us, I think, to the best of our ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's one of the things that makes me crazy is that we talk about mental health without talking about brain health. Like, how could we possibly not talk about the organ that that we need to support, right? Like the true actual physical health of that organ has massive impacts on how we feel and, if our mental health is working or not.
Mm-hmm. And of course, our ability to manage stress, which seems to be the source of most disease anyway. So it's like, if we want to manage our relationship to stress better, then obviously caring about that brain health to support the mental health is kind of the foundation piece, is what you're saying.
Super
right?
critical. Yeah.
And then
Totally.
obviously there's the brain body connection. I mean, they're not separate. So it's like, we really need to nurture. I heard someone say, now I'm trying, it's terrible. I hate not being able to credit, but someone said today on a podcast I was listening to, we think health is a noun, but really it's a verb. Like we're supposed to be, it's a constant state of practice and working on, like we are working on health, like we are being health. And it's such a reminder. I think we've just lost sight of the prioritization of this in our life and building those foundations.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to steal that too.
That's so good. Christine, this has been absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful for you. I will probably have to ask you back sometime, because this is such a powerful conversation and such a, in an area that I think we're going to continue to see so much more desire to learn. And I think you've just normalized it really well for us today. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
How does everybody learn more from you? If they want to know more about this, if they have a diagnosis, or they want to reach out, or they want to just support their brain body health, with you, how do they reach out?
Yeah. So I actually just recorded a private podcast. So it's a pop-up podcast. It's 4 episodes all about women's health, metabolism, and ADHD, and kind of what that intersection looks like. So that's on my website. It's christinemaccarroll.com/private pod. So you have to opt in. It's not just like anywhere, but you can put it in any of your podcast players. So you can, you basically just, you grab the link and you can throw it into Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. So it's just a deep dive explicitly on this conversation that we just had and what that intersection looks like. Went a little deeper into those assessments, the functional assessments you can do, some specific nutrients, all of that is in there. And then, over on Instagram, just my name, Christine.MacCarroll as well. I haven't been as active, but I'm working on improving that presence over there too. So you can follow me there. You can DM me. It is actually me in the DMs. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer there as well.
That's amazing. I love it. I'm totally sending that link to my wife after this. So thank you so much. And myself, I'm going to also listen. Thank you so much, Christine. I so appreciate you. Go out, sisters, be more in your life and not just less on a scale. We'll catch you next time. Thank you so much for joining me on the Period Whisperer podcast. I want to encourage you to reach out to me directly and message me if there are topics or things you're struggling with, so we can address those right where you are at. And of course, if you loved this episode, if you learned something, make sure to share it with your friends, and please rate and review it wherever you get your podcasts.